Let coaches coach and leave your gender bias at the door. Welcome to Hack Learning. It's what you can do tomorrow. I'm your host, Mark Barnes, and this is Hack Learning Uncut, meaning we are not editing and we are not creating show notes. It's just sort of me riffing and ranting. And if you landed here, then perhaps someone shared the link. See, we're not editing, even when I fumble the words. Someone shared the link and you landed here, and I appreciate that. And if you'd like to hear more of the show and subscribe, please get over to hacklearningpodcast.com. So in this uncut version today, I'm going to talk a little bit about tennis. And hopefully, as I like to do, we're going to circle back to education, and I'm going to provide some very simple hacks that will improve tennis, coaching, and gender bias, I hope. So if you are a tennis fan and you're listening when this show was recorded in September of 2018, you may have watched the Women's U.S. Open Tennis Championship, and the final was between the legendary Serena Williams and the young and newcomer to the Grand Slam tennis final, Naomi Osaka. And this was less about tennis, unfortunately, and more about a very interesting dispute and something that brings up an issue that we really need to talk about more, and is an ongoing issue, and is one that I think we can hack. And we can hack it for tennis and for life and for school and for kids, and we'll all be better for it. Little disclaimer here. I will say that I am a Serena Williams fan and have been for a very long time. I admire the incredible body of work that Serena has in tennis. She's arguably the most celebrated woman player ever, and I think possibly the most celebrated and successful tennis player in history, regardless of if you're a man or if you're a woman. And in fact, I think Serena Williams is one of the greatest sports legends of our time. She has, I won't read you her resume. You can look that up. But let's just say that she has done quite a bit to deserve the celebrity that she has. So Serena is playing in the U.S. Open final, and she faces a young Japanese player. And there's a little story there that I think is a good one. And Naomi Osaka was the first Japanese player to make it to a Grand Slam tennis final, 20 years old, and courageous and certainly not backing down from the legendary Serena Williams. And she played an incredible match and ultimately won. But unfortunately, Osaka winning the U.S. Open and being the first Japanese player to do so is not the story. And that's unfortunate, but it is something that we need to talk about. So in the Open, I said that coaches should coach and we should leave our gender bias at the door. So if you know the story, I'll try and keep it short. Serena Williams, in a pivotal moment in the match, in the second set, she was penalized because the chair umpire said that her coach, who's sitting in the stands, was coaching her. Sounds odd, right? A coach coaching, and there's a penalty for that. But that's the way it is in tennis. The coaches must sit in the stands as spectators, and they are not allowed to coach or send any kind of signals to their players. And the chair umpire said that Serena's coach was doing this, and whether she knew about it or not, she was penalized. So she loses a point for this. Well, that's a pivotal moment right there, because points in tennis, especially in a very competitive championship match, come at a premium. And 1 point in a tennis game can turn the game around, win the game, and turn an entire set around. So what happens is, after this first penalty, Serena loses a point, has nothing to do with the chair umpire. She gets mad at herself and she slams her racket down, as, angry sports people will do, competitors will do. She slams her racket down and breaks it. And now I do believe this is in the rules that you can't do this, but we almost never see penalties for this. You certainly don't, very rarely do you see a man player penalized for this. I mean, if John McEnroe were penalized for all of the times he slammed his racket or yelled at someone, my goodness, he would have never won a tennis game. And if you know John McEnroe, you know that he was a marvelous player and a champion as well. So what happens then is she slams the racket down and the umpire assesses another point penalty. So now she's lost 2 points and she's on the verge of losing a set and a match. And she goes over to get her new racket and she gets upset and she yells at the chair umpire and says, now you've taken a point from me and you're a thief. And then at that moment, the chair umpire assesses another penalty, and that point gives the game to Osaka. And at that point, she goes up in the match 5-3, and then it's her serve, and she serves for the match and wins. So the issue here is a variety of things. I mean, in one, Serena stands up for herself. And the biggest part of all of this was Serena Williams yelling at the chair umpire and telling him that he should tell the audience that she didn't cheat because she's not a cheater. She says, I'm not a cheater, and that he owes her an apology. And this continues, and it escalates into this really big argument, and she protests to the tournament referee, and this becomes a whole spectacle. And, a lot of people are on either side of the argument. Some say, oh, well, she stood up and she did what she needed to do. And others say, oh, she diminished Osaka's win because she made it all about her and there was grandstanding and all of that. But for me, there's two issues that I mentioned in the open. The first, and, this is still hack learning. And we can bring this back to teaching and learning. Sure, we're not talking about education necessarily today, but it's teaching and learning. And I think this is something it's just steeped in hack learning because it's simple, and we're all about simplicity. So if we want to solve a problem like this, and we want to keep it from happening in the future, very simple. One, allow coaches to coach. I mean, the fact that a coach in tennis is not allowed to coach their players is one of the most illogical and ludicrous things I've ever heard in the history of sports. It's just absurd. So if a coach can coach, first of all, this whole thing with Serena Williams probably never happens because it all begins with the penalty for coaching. And Serena Williams, a celebrated champion, gets very upset and tells the umpire who has called her out in front of a large audience in there live at the court and then on TV and called her out for being a cheater. And she says, I'm not a cheater, and I want you to say I'm not a cheater. And I mean, I don't think anybody's ever called Serena Williams a cheater before. So that's an issue there that escalates and some could argue ultimately cost her the match. And that's not to take anything away from the young Osaka who played brilliantly. But if the coach is allowed to coach, there's no penalty for Serena's coach coaching her. And then most likely this never escalates. So that's a very simple hack. I mean, let's get on board. What do we need to do to get the professional tennis people to say, hey, this is dumb, let's let our people coach? And the other thing is gender bias. And, we could spend a lot of time on this, and I want to keep this short, as we like to do in these Hack Learning Uncut versions. But I think what happens is you have a male umpire, and he has a history of penalizing people, so it's not new for him, and he's penalized men too, to be fair. But Serena Williams' complaint was that this has happened to her often at the U.S. Open, and there were other incidents in this tournament where women were treated differently. One of the players changed her shirt on the court, which is allowed by the rules. Men do it all the time. And she had a sports bra on, of course, pulls off her shirt and puts another one on, and she's penalized for that. So, there is some bias here. I think Serena Williams has a good point. And when they asked her about this afterwards and her outburst, she said, you know what, it didn't help me today, but maybe it'll help someone in the future. And this is what I love about Serena Williams. In addition to her marvelous play and the fact that she's a brilliant champion, she is an activist. She stands up for her race, for her gender, and for anything that she believes is wrong. She has a voice as a celebrity. and she isn't afraid to stand up and say things. And in this case, she said, it maybe won't benefit me now in this tournament. I lost, and she praised her opponent. But she said in the future, it might make a difference. And I think that's brilliant. So the other hack I said in the beginning, leave your gender bias at the door. This umpire could have de-escalated this. Even if we are stuck with this non-coaching rule, the umpire didn't have to penalize for what he perceives to be coaching. And then he could have just said, hey, this is a championship match. I'm not going to escalate things by continuing to pile on to Serena Williams, a great champion. And I think that he not only robbed the viewers of what could have been a better match, but also brought this issue up and made it so that Serena Williams had to make a point of saying, I'm not a cheater, and also make a point of saying, I feel that there's some bias here, that men get away with a whole lot in sports that women do not. And that's a problem that we need to hack. Hey, I'm Mark Barnes, and this is the Hack Learning Podcast. We didn't talk about teaching and learning necessarily today, but we did talk about teaching moments. And I think it's important for us to continue the conversation about gender bias. We can use the Serena Williams episode, if you will, as an example, and there are many more. And let's keep the conversation going on how to eliminate something that is a big problem in our world. Hey, thanks for listening. See you next time. All episodes of the Hack Learning Podcast can be found at hacklearningpodcast.com.